Brown, Administrator at the Women's Studies Center. Just a few announcements. Tonight at 7 p.m., LGBTQ Initiative is hosting an open space zone open to all students, faculty, and staff. And Thursday at 11:30 in the Women's Studies Center, there will be a zine making workshop. If you have any questions, you can ask Hannah O'Malley. And if you need to leave at any point during the presentation, please do so respectfully and quietly. Please clean up around you. There's compost and trash cans in the back. And if you can, help us out by putting the chairs back on the racks before you leave. That would be great. Thank you so much for coming. Today we have speakers addressing the reality of eating disorders. Niki Keating is a counselor in a counseling center who specializes in eating disorders. Rachel Goldberg is a survivor of an eating disorder and will speak to her personal experience. And Sam Hom spent the summer working for the National Eating Disorders Association and continues to assist the organization with their online crisis outreach.
Hi everyone, I guess we'll take it away. I don't love using microphones, so please let me know if volume, if it's too close, things like that. Is this a good volume? Cool, thank you. So I'm Niki Keating. I'm a counseling psychologist. That means I have a doctoral degree in counseling psychology. I went to the University at Buffalo for my graduate degree and then studied at Grand Valley State University outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan for my doctoral internship. And then I came to Colgate. So this is my third year at Colgate, and really enjoyed working here. I do have some clinical expertise in eating disorders. I was trained to work with adolescents and young adults, and from an early part in my training had the opportunity to work with quite a few individuals with eating disorders. So my part in this panel today is to present about general information about eating disorders, discuss a little bit about the treatment process, talk about some of the sociocultural factors, and then address some of the issues at Colgate that are pertinent to eating disorders. Before I dive into that, I want to just take a step back and talk about our goals as a panel. Through our meetings and conversations, our first and foremost goal is just to create a space to open up dialogue around the topic of eating disorders and body image. Eating disorders, unfortunately, are sometimes guarded by a lot of secret keeping and using food and bodies in ways that aren't always healthy. So we're hoping that this will inspire you to talk about this with your friends, with your families, with each other, and support each other towards body acceptance and having healthy bodies. Our other goal is to help you understand some of the resources that are available for individuals who might struggle with these issues, both on campus and off campus. And I think all three of us will address those things throughout. Anything else to add before I dive into my section? Okay. Ellie, you can go ahead and advance the first slide.
Oh, if you just press the space bar.
Oh, great.
There we go.
Yes.
Or, there we go.
Okay, we'll figure out the technical part. It's just an outline of what I'm going to talk about. Nothing important. Okay, so this is part of what I'll talk about in a little bit is the Colgate Body Project. So first I want to start by talking about eating disorders in general. I imagine that many of us in the room have some basic knowledge of what an eating disorder is. I want to talk from a clinical perspective about what I think are the most important things to know about an eating disorder. So some of the typical questions that I get most frequently are, who gets eating disorders? Typically, historically, this disease has been thought of as something that only impacts white, affluent women. That is completely false. We have ample evidence that proves that eating disorders occur in people of all racial, ethnic, gender, age identities. We know that as a fact. A lot of the research around eating disorders happens at treatment facilities. Inpatient treatment facilities and intensive outpatient treatment facilities are often very costly. So you can imagine someone who does not have great healthcare coverage or is having to pay for their treatment out of their own pocket would need to have quite a bit of resource to be able to seek treatment. So therefore, a lot of the research that we have on eating disorders is not representative of the population who is impacted by the disease. So that stinks. There's a lot of people out there that are doing really good work to try to get a better understanding of how eating disorders influence different identity types. We also know that there's a myth out there that eating disorders don't occur as frequently in men. To some extent, that's true. We do know that there's a disproportionate number of women that are impacted by eating disorders than men. But over the last decade, there's been a significant increase in the number of men who are seeking treatment for eating disorders. So that literature is also growing at a very rapid rate. Some of the hallmark symptoms of an eating disorder are really important to be aware of. I'm not going to go into depth about the 3 different categories of eating disorders: binge eating disorder, anorexia, and bulimia. Because I don't think it's necessarily important to understand what the difference is between each of them. But I do think it's important to understand, kind of on a bigger scope, what some of the main symptoms of an eating disorder are. And these are things that apply to all of the different eating disorders. First, engaging in disordered eating behaviors. So what does that mean? That means using food in a way that it's other than nourishing your body. So we all have bodies. We all eat to nourish our bodies. And someone with an eating disorder begins to use eating behaviors in a way to control or manage another underlying issue. In some ways, you can think about this as like abusing food. Another hallmark symptom of an eating disorder is someone who has a preoccupation with their body size, shape, or weight. Oftentimes this impacts their self-worth and self-acceptance and self-compassion. So we often see that individuals who are presenting with eating disorders feel pretty crummy about themselves and are lacking in a lot of the skills to allow them to be resilient and to manage stressors, and it becomes very difficult to function in that way. Many eating disorders result in changes to weight or body composition. However, it's extremely important to remember that you cannot diagnose somebody with an eating disorder just by looking at them. All body shapes, sizes are susceptible to eating disorders and present for treatment for eating disorders. So I think that that's a really important thing to take away from our talk today, is that it's important to not make assumptions about what someone else might be dealing with just based on their physical appearance. One of the most frequent questions I get is why do eating disorders develop? How do they happen? Why do they happen? And frequently, if you talk to people who have recovered from an eating disorder, and Rachel, you can share with us if that's your experience too, it's often not about the food, right? The food is the symptom. So the disordered eating behavior, whether it's eating too much, eating too little, engaging in other unhealthy eating behaviors, is representing something deeper, an underlying issue that is really significant and severe. And so an eating disorder really is the body and mind's way of trying to manage a very stressful system or situation. So, you can kind of think about it as the brain is trying to adapt to stress. And so it's getting creative in doing that, and it's using food for a purpose other than nourishing the body. So the use of food might be trying to attain control. It might be trying to validate worth or provide self-acceptance, trying to get other people to look at them in a different way. So eating disorders are oftentimes very tricky diseases to treat because there's a lot of underlying issues that can contribute to the continued use of the disordered behaviors. Oftentimes when I work with a student with an eating disorder, we kind of unearth different things, things that their eating disorder has served a specific purpose for. Some of those might include their source of self-worth, adequacy, love and acceptance, or privilege in their lives. So it's really important to remember that it really isn't about the food. And so when you're trying to support someone with an eating disorder, helping them to accept themselves as they are, enhance their sense of self-worth, and supporting them in those ways can often be much more productive than trying to make sure that they're eating or eating the right things. One of the other tricky things about treating eating disorders is that they frequently co-occur with other disorders, like depression or anxiety, sometimes obsessive compulsive disorder, or addictions. So it's hard, it's the chicken or egg question, which comes first. We're not really sure. Did the depression lead to disordered eating, which spiraled into an eating disorder? Those are really hard questions to answer. So oftentimes, people who seek treatment for eating disorders actually get treatment from a whole team. And the team can help to really navigate and strategize on a very individualized basis what the most productive treatment strategy for that individual would be. So a typical treatment team for someone with an eating disorder would include a psychologist, a physician to check in about physical health, and also a dietitian, nutritionist, and sometimes a trainer who can teach appropriate levels of exercise, those kinds of things. So it's definitely a multidisciplinary focus in providing treatment for individuals. The first priority in treating an eating disorder is, because obviously this is a disorder that can impact your physical wellness, is to make sure that that individual is physically stable. In some cases, eating disorders result in significant disruption to bodily systems, other than just weight. So it's really important to make sure that the individual is restored to a stable place as far as physical health, and that really requires the care and attention of a physician. Sometimes health becomes such a priority that they have to leave campus if it's a student, because they might need a higher level of care than can be provided here on campus from the health center or the local hospital or from the counseling center staff. Talk a little bit about treatment and then talk about some of the sociocultural factors that influence eating disorders. So early stages of treatment are really focused on reducing the disordered eating behavior, so getting rid of the symptoms, as we talked about, and really getting to what is that underlying function or purpose that the eating disorder has served. Eating disorder treatment is often long-term, so it can span, it's not unusual for it to span several years, and before someone feels like they can be in recovery for a very long time. Sometimes people will come in and out of treatment because they're at different stages of change. So sometimes people are contemplative, meaning that they're not necessarily ready to make complete changes. And then when someone moves into more of an action stage, they might be ready to go back to treatment and do things in a different way and identify recovery. Unfortunately, eating disorders have a very high rate of relapse. And part of that is because oftentimes when people seek treatment for an eating disorder, they may not have the luxury of having the team approach. So we find that the most successful treatment is when we do have a team who can treat that individual from multiple perspectives. So there's a huge body of literature out there that discusses the sociocultural factors that influence eating disorders, and I'm not going to do it justice at all, but I am going to acknowledge the fact that the media can often portray very damaging messages to us as we think about how the media applies to how we feel and think about our bodies, how we interact with each other, and how we talk to each other about our bodies and how we feel. Unfortunately, the media really often creates an environment where eating disorders can thrive. And there's the idea of the thin ideal, which is an unhealthy, distorted body image where thin equals maybe unearned privileges or positive outcomes in life. And we know that for a fact that is absolutely false. I think there's some truth to the privilege piece of it, right? Attractiveness has been correlated with privilege. That's not necessarily what we're here to talk about, but I want to acknowledge that those things are present in our society and they are very influential in how, as a culture, how Western culture talks and thinks about a lot of these topics. So we know that in our Western culture, objectification and body shaming are pretty common things, and oftentimes we engage in behaviors that perpetuate those ideas or behaviors, and we don't necessarily always realize it. These are both factors that can contribute to the development of disordered eating behaviors, also contribute to low self-acceptance, low self-worth. When your self-worth relies on how you look or how other people perceive you, that can be a pretty damaging combination, and can allow you to start to think about engaging in really unhealthy behaviors to either maintain a certain appearance or be perceived in a certain way. So how does this all come together at Colgate? So in my training, I've had the luxury of being able to work at 3 other university counseling centers and get a sense of how they treat students with eating disorders, how as a campus they talk about it and focus on it. I think that that's given me a really interesting and unique perspective as I come into Colgate, because I know that these things happen here, and anecdotally, I don't have evidence to support this, but anecdotally I would say I think that they happen at a little bit of a higher rate here than at other campuses that I've worked at. I think there are some things that are unique to Colgate that contribute to that. A lot of times, some of our students' strengths become their Achilles heel as well. And some of the things that I'll list are certainly not a surprise to you. Colgate students are high achievers. They are perfectionistic. We have Division I athletics. Students are very individualistic, independent, and in my experience sometimes have quite a few barriers to be able to ask for and receive help. And those things put together, I think, sometimes can create an environment where toxic or dysfunctional behaviors can kind of run rampant and serve a specific purpose. I think a lot of the different issues on our campus perpetuate this idea of the thin ideal. And I think other individuals in our society have recognized that, being rated by the Princeton Review as the most beautiful campus, not only geographically and structurally, but also the composition of our student body. I think that speaks a lot to, it's not just us that is experiencing that, a lot of other people experience Colgate in that way too. And although I think that's something that in some ways we can be proud of and have pride in, I also think that we need to be really honest with ourselves about what that means and some of the outcomes from that. So just put those things out there as my opinions and things, for maybe you to marinate on and think about, and I'd love to have a conversation with anyone about those things. I'll quickly talk about some of the preventative things that I'm involved in, and I also want to make sure that we acknowledge some of those things at the end, and I'm happy to take questions after everyone has shared. So there's a lot of preventative and system-focused programming around these issues at Colgate, and I think that that's a fantastic thing. We have various student groups that I'm sure many of you are aware of, such as Project Beauty, Care Health Educators, Active Minds, who actively think about some of these things and try to put on programming or bring speakers to campus to contribute positive information. We also, I've developed the Colgate Body Project course, which is a 5-week course to address different issues related to body acceptance and the positive body movement. It's a 5-week course. It's co-taught by me and wellness intern Danny Pooter, who's here today. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Body Project at the end. But there's sign-ups for the next round if anyone's looking for a PE credit. You can actually get a PE credit by taking the class, or you can just take it for the sake of learning about these things and having a place to have some dialogue. We also have an eating issues management team, which I'll talk a little bit more about at the end as well. But the treatment team approach that I referenced before as being the most effective way to approach an eating disorder, we have those resources here for students who are actively in recovery from an eating disorder. I'm happy to share more about that or answer any other questions. That's all I have. At this point, I'll pass up to Rachel to share about her experiences.
Hi. So for those of you who went to In Your Company or some others of you who are here today know that I have had anorexia, which started in my sophomore year of high school. And kind of what Niki was talking about, there was a constellation isolation and things that contributed to the start. But, you know, after talking about it a lot with therapists, I still really don't know what the cause of my eating disorder was. My sophomore year, I wasn't trying to lose weight. I didn't put myself on a diet. It wasn't until my mom kind of told me I was looking thin that I even started thinking about it. And so I think that maybe I subconsciously was losing weight. If I wasn't happy with my body, self-conscious, being in high school. I still really don't know exactly. But then in the middle of my sophomore year, we went to the doctor to get a form signed for a summer program that I was doing. And my doctor came back at the end of the appointment and kind of confronted my mom and I and told us that I had lost a lot of weight in the 6 months since my yearly physical, that my heart rate and blood pressure were at this point like dangerously low, and that at that moment I had to stop all physical activity, like I couldn't even do school PE anymore. And at that point we really didn't understand that it was a mental health problem. I was diagnosed with an eating disorder not otherwise specified, EDNOS, and they just put me with a nutritionist. And so they targeted what I was eating. Within a few months, I had gotten my weight back up, and they were like, awesome, all right, you can stop with your nutritionist, you're great now. Well, obviously I wasn't, because we hadn't gone after the mental health of why I was losing weight. And so then, at this point, I kind of actively started restricting again, and making very conscious decisions about what I was and was not eating. I kind of started a mental list of things I wouldn't let myself eat, or amounts of food that I wouldn't let myself eat. And then, you know, I started to lose weight again, and so then in the middle of my junior year, my mom brought me back to the doctor, and at this point, I was officially diagnosed with anorexia. And they were like, okay, well, maybe this is a mental health problem, so they put me with a nutritionist and a therapist this time. But at this point, I was dead set against the therapist. I was like, this is so stupid, I don't want to go to therapy, this isn't going to help me. And so I didn't put in the work. I wasn't wholeheartedly invested in my effort of recovery, and I also really didn't click with the therapist, so like that really didn't do anything. And so again, with the nutritionist, I got my weight back up again, and then the summer before senior year at Colgate, and throughout my senior year of high school, I was still engaging in these restrictive behaviors. I had so many excuses and tricks up my sleeve to use about why I wasn't doing certain things or eating certain foods. And it also caused a lot of tension at home. My mom was my best friend, and I can tell her anything and everything, but this was the one thing that I kept secrets. And we never argued, but we argued about this all the time. And it was hard, because my parents didn't really understand, especially my dad. The whole mental health component, he's like, why don't you just eat more? Or, you know, Rachel, I'll make a deal with you. I'll have some broccoli tonight if you have a cookie. Dad, you've solved my anorexia. And so it was hard, because like my parents, they just didn't get that it was a mental health concern. And the summer before senior year at Colgate, I saw a new therapist just to kind of address my perfectionism and my control in life. And it was then that kind of is what Niki said. We realized that my eating disorder wasn't my problem. It was a symptom of my perfectionism, of my over-controlling that was prevalent in my entire life. And so then I came to Colgate, and I didn't push myself out of my comfort zone. I didn't go out. I mean, I couldn't drink because, you know, all the calories and alcohol, and how could I have a hangover the next morning because then I couldn't do my homework and I couldn't get good grades. And so I kind of dug myself into a very deep hole my freshman fall here. And I went to the gym all the time, and I was weighing myself pretty much every day, and I saw my weight spiraling down, way below what it was my sophomore year. But it was almost powerful to me, like, oh, look at you, you're losing all this weight, you can still go to the gym, you can still get good grades, and I was feeding my own fire. And I was rewarding myself. If I went to bed hungry, I would chastise myself if I ate certain foods or didn't go to the gym that day. And so I was in a really, really detrimental relationship with myself where I was my own worst enemy. And then freshman fall, I went home for Thanksgiving break, and my parents freaked out because they really didn't realize how much weight I had lost. And so that next morning, they took me to urgent care. And my mom said, if your blood rate and heart pressure are low, we're taking you to the hospital right here and now. But somehow my body had adapted to my starvation state, and so my heart rate and blood pressure were fine. And so I'm, you know, like, I pat myself on the back, like, good job, Rachel, you avoided this one. Obviously not. My parents, within a couple of days, had set up an appointment with an eating disorder specialist, And the four of us all sat down together, and they all thought I should leave school and go to inpatient therapy. And it wasn't until that point that I really understood what I had done to myself. And, all the health scares throughout high school and college where, you can have a shortened life, you can be infertile. We actually had my bone density tested, and I tested positive for osteopenia, which is pre-osteoporosis, as a teenager. And all those things that they didn't hit home. But then the inpatient therapy, the prospect of leaving school, of it impacting my life, that's what finally hit home. And so I convinced them to let me come back to Colgate, and if I could get my weight up to an agreed upon number by winter break, then I could come back in the spring. And so I felt really gross, but I did it, and I ate a ton of food. I would steal the desserts from Brink so I could have them before bed every night. And I made a really big effort to get my weight up, and I did. And so I came back in the spring, and as Niki said, it was a team approach. I saw a counselor once a week. I went to the health center once a week to get weighed, my vitals checked. And I still didn't love my body at this point because I'm still gaining weight and I'm getting used to all this weight on my body. And this is coming from someone who I used to spend 10 minutes looking at myself in the mirror before I got in the shower, turning at every angle and seeing fat there and there and there, and telling myself, well, if you eat less at dinner tonight, that will go away right there and you'll be prettier. And so it was a shift from looking at myself that way and trying to change my perspective, and looking at my body and telling myself I was beautiful and appreciating myself for being healthy, which for eating disorder patients is a scary word. And slowly getting used to how I looked and getting in a stronger mental state. And then I went abroad last fall, which also was scary because in Spain there's a lot of pork, a lot of seafood, which are two things I didn't eat a lot of. And dinner is at 9 p.m. And, all those things would be changes for other people, but for me that was scary. That was a change from the norm, from my patterns of food and what I was used to doing. And so I was afraid, what if I lose weight here? What if I come back and have to go into treatment? But kind of the opposite happened, and I ended up thriving when I was abroad, and I tried so many new foods, and I had ice cream, I had drinks with my friends, and so that was a really, really positive experience for me. And coming back now, some things that I try to do to maintain my recovery are a lot of self-reflection and checking in with myself. And there are moments when I look at myself in the mirror and find myself criticizing myself still. And it's kind of weird, I can flip my perspective and realize that, Rachel, you're looking at yourself from your disordered perspective. That's not how you look. And make sure I keep pushing myself to try new foods. And, I had certain fear foods that I wouldn't let myself eat, and keep pushing myself to eat those. And I still talk to my therapist every few weeks and check in. And now I have a really good supportive network with some of my friends on campus and my family, which has been phenomenal. And doing these types of things, I spoke in the company, and I'm doing this. This is, as much to educate others and to raise awareness, but it's also very empowering for me. And the self-reflection that I've gone through in talking about these things has been very therapeutic as well. And so just to wrap up, I encourage anyone who has any questions or concerns, talk to me about anything. I'm very open. And just know that there are a lot of avenues of support on and off campus for you and for your friends if anyone is going through these types of things. And so kind of to transition to Sam, who interned at NIDA this summer, National Eating Disorders Association. Thanks, Rachel.
Hi everyone. Is the mic good? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I did this past summer and that I still continue to do for NIDA, and then kind of how working there has kind of shifted my perspective coming back to campus. And it's been a while since I've been on campus because I was abroad in Copenhagen in the spring. Not that that was a necessarily really healthy, body positive place. But I just haven't been back at Colgate in a while, so you kind of get out of the bubble and you forget kind of the Colgate specific issues that happen here in the language and all of that, and I can talk about that more. But basically I was a helpline intern at the National Eating Disorders Association in New York City, which was something that I didn't necessarily think that I would be doing. I knew I wanted to work in nonprofits, and this kind of really intersected with my interest in volunteer work and psychology. I'm a psychology major, and my interest kind of in like gender issues as well, because this is a very gendered issue. But I was kind of more focused on doing like fundraising and development work and programming and things that I was interested in, and had a lot of experience and a lot of comfort doing before. But a friend who worked at NIDA and who connected me here suggested that I try working on the helpline, and she said that she felt it would be a really powerful experience for me, and it was, and I'm really, really happy I did it. I was trained for, I think it was a 30-hour training, and I started on emails, and basically how NIDA works is we will get requests from people, whether it be people themselves who are struggling, friends, family members, physicians, educators. A whole bunch of different people will contact us and ask us for certain resources or information, and then we can either contact them through emails or through the anonymous helpline. And that experience was definitely, it was definitely hard, but it was really, really important. And I think that some of the things that came up a lot on the phone calls when I was answering the phones are things that Niki kind of mentioned before, but I think a big rumor that I wanted to dispel especially was I would be asked a lot, you know, like I or my friend or my sister or whoever is not overweight, so they can't have an eating disorder, right? And that's false, completely false. And I think that the way that people think about people who have eating disorders and what they look like is very skewed. And I think that that's just really important to remember. And if you kind of said you can't tell someone has an eating disorder, you can't diagnose them just by looking at them. But yeah, I think that that's really important to understand and notice. And it would come up a lot that people would ask for certain resources, such as inpatient facilities that also cater towards trauma, or sexual assault, or depression and anxiety. So these are a lot of co-occurring issues that came up a lot when I was working there. And one thing that I really, really loved about working at NIDA was my first day we kind of did a tour of the building, and we were talking about kind of ground rules and things that at NIDA people really try to implement, and one of them was that we don't talk about food, as in like if we're eating lunch with each other or we're just chatting about our day, like we don't comment on what other people are eating, other people don't comment on what we're eating, and I think that that really fostered a very positive experience working there, and it was nice to know that behind the scenes we're very much living by the same things that we're telling other people, and that's also something, I mean, I'm trying to think now if I've been trying to do it more here, so that's not something that I just wanted to happen in the office. I was hoping to bring that back with me, and not commenting on what other people are eating or really critically like evaluating what I'm eating. So I think that that's really important, and those are small things that I think everyone can kind of do. And Rachel and Niki and I were just saying in the beginning that even if you don't feel like eating disorders are specifically related to you, definitely body image is related to all of us. And we talk about the media a lot as something that contributes to this mental illness. But I think that it's important, and I urge everyone to think about how we contribute to the media, and how a lot of our language, and that's something that I noticed coming back to campus, like how problematic the language is surrounding food that we use, and things that people I think don't really realize or think about when they're saying it. And I know that people don't mean to, but it's something that I was really shocked by when I came back, and it's something that I think could be really triggering to people who are going through this or who are recovering. And so just to do that and kind of think about how social media influences this. I went on Facebook and I was trying to just look for instances of like body shaming or like praising someone for being thin, and I feel like, so these are real things, like real comments that I found. It wasn't very hard to find, and maybe depending on the social circles that we're in or people we're friends with, this isn't something that we see a lot, but it's definitely out there. These were readily available to me, and I took out the identifiers obviously, but yeah, I thought that these were really powerful to see how people compliment other people for being thin, and like always praising thinness and always centering that as what's beautiful and ideal. or even like the comment down there, the eat something, or it looks like someone sucked up your face with a vacuum, which is an odd way of saying that someone's face looks thinner, but I think that it's interesting how aware we are of other people's bodies, and that we also feel like it's our right to comment on people's bodies. So I would really urge people to not only be like kind to yourself and your own body, that's really important, but just like it's really not your place at all to talk about someone else's body. And that's obviously something that I have to work at. I think it's really easy to kind of look at a picture of someone and it's so removed and you forget that there's an actual person in that picture, but just to dismiss her and say like, oh, that looks so bad on her, or why would she wear that dress or that shirt or whatever it is. So I put these up there just to kind of remind us that what we say on the internet is available for anyone to look at and put in a brown bag. And yeah, so that, yeah, I know. Okay, so also something, and Niki did a really great job of touching on the team approach to treating an eating disorder and resources that are available on campus. But something that I did a lot of work with was, finding resources for people, especially when you leave campus, because we're only here for 4 years and these issues don't disappear. Definitely at Colgate there are things that kind of intensify and they amplify this sort of body dissatisfaction and disordered eating, but it doesn't leave once we leave the campus, right? So there are a lot of resources out there that are super helpful that include therapy and counseling, and there are different levels of care such as partial hospitalization programs, intensive outpatient programs, day programs. Support groups are a really big thing. A lot of times when we were talking to clients, we would recommend an eating disorder specialist and also a support group option. And sometimes people weren't comfortable with that, so there are also online support options and phone counseling or Skype counseling. So there are a lot of different options out there that are available for a lot of different needs, especially because traveling may not be an option. It was really difficult to find eating disorder specialists and support groups that were within a 30-minute drive from a small town in like Michigan or Kansas or Minnesota. So there are a lot of different options available, and definitely you touched on the financial burdens of eating disorders, but that's something else that became really apparent when I was looking for treatment options for people, because they would say, I have to use this sort of healthcare or Medicare or Medicaid, and I would have a whole bunch of options in front of me on my database, and once I narrowed it down by Medicaid or Medicare, they would shrink very quickly. And people are doing great work to advocate for different financial options for people, and excuse me, just access to these sorts of needs and cares. But that's something I think that people don't really notice as much or think about, and it's something important, I think, to notice. So if people are interested, and we can talk about this obviously in the Q&A, but the National Eating Disorders Association, their website is really, really, really great and really helpful. It's nationaleatingdisorders.org, and they have a lot of different information and ways to help a friend or a daughter or a sister or a brother. And I feel like that's something that I found myself giving resources out for a lot. There were certain handouts that would just say, what should I say? Which is a really big thing. And if you're trying to approach a conversation, I think it's important to kind of educate yourself before you try to jump into that sort of conversation. And so those are just some examples of some of the worksheets, and if I can leave a link up there, or if people are interested, we can go through the handouts together. There are a bunch of them for a bunch of different needs. And then this right here, the Proud to Be Me, this is a website that's kind of a sister website to NIDA, and it's an online community and a blog where people can post their recovery stories, or I wrote like a makeup shaming article about this over the summer. So it is an online platform where people can talk about body image and different ways of body empowerment as well, which I think can be really helpful for people who are looking for that sort of community and maybe aren't able to find it. And that's kind of all I have. Thank you.
So I just wanted to talk available at Colgate, and then we'll open it up for questions. So first, one of the conversations that I have with students a lot who are trying to support a friend with an eating disorder is that they won't come to treatment. So we know that individuals with eating disorders have quite a bit of can have quite a bit of resistance sometimes to seek help. And Rachel acknowledged that in her story, that it took her quite a while to realize how significant her disorder was. So we can't make anyone go to treatment, but there are a lot of things that you can do to support your friend or loved one in ways that are really constructive and helpful. First and foremost, it's not about getting them to eat cookies, right, like Rachel's dad, although I think it came from a place of love. We know that that is always the case. But it is important to just support them and wherever they are in their stage of change. It is important to remember that the resources that we have on campus are really appropriate for a student who is in the recovery stage of an eating disorder or who's actively being is interested and motivated to seek help for their eating disorder. We unfortunately don't have the capacity to treat somebody at a higher level of care at this environment. So it's really important to remember that when someone comes over to the counseling center or maybe sees someone at the health center for their eating disorder, we're going to be thinking of what's the level of care that's going to be the most appropriate for this student. And like I had acknowledged before, first and foremost, physical health and stability is really essential. So if someone is at a place where they're physically not okay, the recommendation may be for them to leave campus, to take a medical leave, or to seek treatment during a break at a higher level of care, such as an inpatient hospital or an intensive outpatient treatment program. Sometimes people are scared of that, but I think it's really important to recognize that if you're struggling with a disorder, you deserve to get a level of care that would be appropriate for how much you're going through. So I definitely want to encourage you to think about that if you have a friend who's thinking about seeking treatment for an eating disorder, and letting them know that they deserve to get the level of care that they really need. And folks at the counseling center or at the health center can be helpful in getting people connected with treatment programs outside of campus, if that's something that would be helpful for them. I mentioned that I chair the eating issues management team. That is the treatment team here on campus. So students who seek treatment either through the health center, the counseling center, going to see the dietitian nutritionist, can all access the eating issues management team as a resource for them. In addition to helping students who are in recovery from eating disorders, the eating issues management team has a second job of just thinking systemically about these issues on campus. And we're always happy to hear from students about their experience on campus, or if there's other preventative programming or ways to have dialogues about these things on campus. Please don't hesitate to approach myself, or Dad Montero is also the director of wellness, is also on the eating issues management team, and we are always willing to understand different ideas about what to do to address these things on campus. So there's a lot of questions always about what can I do, even if you're not your life isn't touched by a friend or a loved one who has an eating disorder. These are things that obviously impact all of us. So I think first and foremost, thinking about your language, challenging yourself to not engage in body shaming or objectification is really, really essential. I think you'll find that it makes your relationships and experiences healthier. You feel better about yourself when you're not always thinking about appearance as it's related to worth or acceptance. Take a class. There's plenty of classes in women's studies that I know address a lot of these issues, or take the Body Project, or go to an event. Sign-ups for the Body Project open up today for the second round of the PE classes. You don't necessarily have to take it for a PE credit, but if that's something that you're interested in receiving more information about, my co-facilitator Danny is going to send around a sheet. Feel free to sign up if you're interested in getting the link to take the class, or just to talk with her more about what it's like. And I would encourage you, if you feel like you're in an organization where having some conversations about body image and body acceptance would be helpful, Danny has put together a fantastic mini version of the body project, so she can bring the body project to you. It's a really cool, is it 90 minutes? 60 minutes, so yeah, so short and sweet, but very effective. She's happy to set up times to do that, so you can have a mini version of the body project, and then maybe kind of get you interested in taking the full length course at some point during your time at Colgate. Definitely encourage you to do those things. So now we'll open it up for questions. I want to make sure that we have a constructive discussion, and we also honor and respect Rachel's courage in sharing her story. So if you could definitely think, yeah. So let's just make sure that we have constructive questions and also work together to be productive about our dialogue and moving it in a healthy direction. And also definitely avoid body shaming language.
So I've shared many meals with a loved one who has an eating disorder. I was wondering what the best way to navigate the sharing meal process would be. Should you acknowledge it every time? Should you encourage eating kind of, or should you like, I don't know, give them props if they are, like I don't really know. Are you supposed to mention every time? What's the situation?
I can share. Do you want that first introduction? Sure. Okay. So from my perspective as a clinician, I would say asking the person what they prefer probably would be a good place to start, right? So sometimes individuals are actively working towards changing their behaviors or challenging cognitions around difficult behaviors. So sometimes it is helpful to have an external person providing them support and reinforcement, but then other times it might be frustrating or tiresome, right? So a constant reminder. But, it is definitely probably the elephant at the table, right? Like, recognizing that this is going on. So I would encourage you to do that as the first step. And then I'd also encourage you to try to normalize regular healthy eating behaviors as much as possible. So trying to make sure that it's not always about the food, but maybe the meal is about connecting with them. That emotional satisfaction that we feel when sharing a meal with somebody that we really love and care about. So those would be some of my suggestions.
Yeah, for me personally, going through the recovery process, it was a bit tiresome from people who were close to me at home, hearing it constantly. But what I did appreciate was later that day or another time outside of the meal, if there was a positive comment about how I've been doing lately, or even a criticism, but I was more receptive to it when it wasn't in the moment, like, why are you eating that? Like, what are you doing? Because it kind of made me self-conscious. Like, there were times when I didn't want something if I wasn't hungry. Yes, there were other times when I was doing it because of my disorder, but it made me feel like I was constantly being scrutinized. And then it just, made it a little awkward.
This is a question for Dr. Keating. Could you talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between how eating disorders manifest in men and women, and in terms of who seeks treatment?
Sure, absolutely. So typically we see different categories of eating disorders show up, and when we're looking at the gender spectrum. So definitely I want to preface this by saying that there are definitely trends, but we also see the entire range of possibilities in both men and women and individuals who don't identify with a gender. So in women, we typically see typically earlier onset, so sometime usually between early adolescence and late adolescence is when a lot of eating disorder symptoms show up for the first time. There are theories out there that this coincides with puberty and changes in the body, which makes sense if you think about it. It's sometimes very difficult to manage some of those changes. We typically find that later adolescence is when the most people tend to go to treatment, unless they have incredibly early onset. So a lot of inpatient facilities are designed to cater the needs of adolescent females. who may still be in school, so there may be an educational curriculum at the institution. Things like that are not uncommon. We also typically see a lot of college students who have to leave college to seek treatment. Again, there's definitely a disproportionate number of individuals of resource, of affluence, who are able to seek treatment because treatment is very costly and there's oftentimes very specific limits on how much insurance will cover. As far as how eating disorders typically show up in men, we see sometimes that men tend to come forward less with anorexic-like eating disorders where they're restricting food and trying to be as small as possible. Sometimes we see actually the opposite, where an individual with kind of an idea, if you think about the sociocultural image of what the ideal man looks like, there's a lot of pressure sometimes to be bigger, to bulk up, to be very muscular. So typically binge eating disorder, where someone will engage in frequent periods of eating more than is standard in a typical meal, that will occur frequently. They're trying to gain weight quickly. Or bulimia, where an individual is engaging in a binge behavior and then somehow compensating for the intake of calories through purging activities, which might not only include vomiting but also excessive exercise and things like that. We also are more likely to see issues related to addictions come up in the male population too. Oftentimes steroids are used to enhance muscle mass very quickly, and steroids can be quite addicting, but we also see a lot of abuse of other substances, mainly narcotics, marijuana, those other types of things. So that can make treatment very difficult, especially too. I think there's also an additional stigma in men seeking treatment. I think in general we see that in mental health regardless. But individuals who identify as male often sometimes feel societal pressure to behave a certain way or to be strong, those kinds of things that can really hamper their ability to seek treatment. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Hi, so sorry, this is more of a comment. But Rachel, thank you for sharing your story. You're so brave. That's something that really hits close to home for me because I love one with eating disorder, and Niki's the best. But I don't know if this is just me, but I think it's so screwy that now there's a scale in the women's restroom whenever there's, I know that wasn't put there maliciously by like the gym people, but oh yeah, at the gym. But I just think, especially at a place like Colgate where eating disorders run rampant, and like with me personally, stepped on it at the beginning of the year and like hated the number I saw, and it just like affected the rest of my day. I think like, is there any way we could place that in a not so like visible spot so people who are seeking it out for healthy reasons could go seek it out, but so it's not like in your face when you're just trying to pee or like whatever. I don't know.
I think that is a more than reasonable request. Absolutely. No, I do agree, and I didn't know that because there had been a movement at one point to remove all the scales. Students can bring their own, of course, but it can be not only triggering but also send a message about weight and body shape and those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's horrible.
I'll write it down as something to bring to the next eating issues management team, but if anyone here would want to email, I don't know, Andrew Turner or Christina Turner.
I could email either one. I have a lot of strong feelings about that. I think you'd be met with a really receptive response. Okay, great.
So this is a question for any of you, but I'm sure we've probably all heard that the United States of America apparently has like a problem with obesity. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how to like navigate the difference between body shaming and trying to help people who might not be at a weight that's good for them, like in their lives.
So I think that's a really important question, just especially because there's always talk about the obesity epidemic in America and all the fat children. I think that one of the things that I was learning about, and I have to do more reading and more research on this, But I thought it was really interesting. They have a lot of resources, like a kind of like a library at NIDA, and you can kind of check the books out and read them. And one thing I was reading is kind of about like the medicalization of our society in general, and also how we talk about fat and how we talk about bodies, and kind of how this idea of obesity and what is fat has been really driven by like doctors and medicine and like weight supplements, you know what I mean? So I think that currently, like, at least my idea up until this point, a lot of people's ideas about what is healthy and what is too much fat, like where do you draw that line, and that's really messed up. And so we talk about like health at every size, right? And accepting your body and loving your body where you are now. And I don't know, like and like I said, I have to do more reading on this, and if someone else knows something more about this, I would love to hear it. But I was reading these articles about how, like one of the things you hear about having extra weight is like you're at an increased risk for a heart attack and diabetes and all these things. And I was reading like facts and statistics that kind of say the opposite, that if you have a heart attack and you have like a little bit of extra weight, that can actually like help. I don't know, and I don't know if that's like, I haven't fact checked, like I said, I'm kind of just answering based on, this is something I thought about as well. But I think that in general, our idea of what is too much weight is problematic. And also to like value someone more or less because of it is problematic too. And like that happens in like the hiring process. Like if someone walks in for a job interview and you see that they're overweight, you assume they're lazy or don't have good habits or something like that. So I think it's more important to recognize how we perceive other people and how that's affected by body shape. And also, like, I don't think that we can talk about the obesity epidemic or any of that without acknowledging how socioeconomic class is like really, really intertwined with that. And the reason why so many people don't have access to those healthy foods is because of the disgusting wealth gap in this country, and food deserts and all of that. So did that help a little? Yeah.
How would you recommend dealing with a situation in which somebody has, I guess, like a mild eating disorder? So, like, they're clearly, like, making themselves throw up every day, but they're not in an unhealthy weight. They're not, you know, like, it's not out of control, really. Like, they're not at a, like, really unhealthy state. Like, how would you deal with that, I guess?
Yeah. I would also just first say, Niki can probably talk to this more, but throwing up every day, I don't think is, what did you say, like I think you said like not a dangerous state or like not an unhealthy place. Like to me, that is definitely very unhealthy. And like I said, you don't have to be underweight or have a certain BMI level to have an eating disorder, right? So if someone is making themselves or purge, right, on a daily basis, I would say that that's something that needs immediate attention. But Niki can answer that.
So maybe you hit on the major part, but definitely, you know, when we see those behaviors happening frequently, meaning more than once a month, you know, when something like that is happening regularly, that would, to me, signify a significant issue that definitely needs some exploring. Sometimes there's a misconception that, you know, the only risk from an eating disorder is weight, underweight specifically, or being overweight. But that's really inaccurate. A lot of the most high physical risk comes in when you're changing your body composition at a different rate. So vomiting and trying to rid yourself of your stomach contents at a frequency that's higher than the average person is going to have significant physical impact on your body and wear away at a lot of the important structures that your body relies on to get the fuel and nourishment that it needs to run all of its appropriate functions. So there's a lot of really dangerous and significant changes that regular vomiting can result in. So I definitely encourage that individual to seek some support and first and foremost get a physical evaluation to make sure that they're physically stable, because we know that purging can also result in difficulties with maintaining electrolyte balance, and that can lead to significant cardiac problems. We also know that there's significant impact on dental enamel and throat and all of those bodily systems, and that's not my area of expertise, but I definitely recognize that if that's presenting, that's kind of our first and foremost, is we need to get that person checked out.
And I would definitely recommend, and I can show you later, but these sorts of how to talk to someone about it, right? Because that's a tough conversation and an awkward conversation to have, especially if someone may be defensive about it, or I don't know if they've talked about it with you before, but I can show you and anyone who's interested how to access these resources. So, yeah,
Sure, that would be great.
people can keep asking questions.
We can also post these on our the Women's Studies page.
Just pointing out, hey, that's not healthy, like that's objectification, or that's body shaming, that's not cool with me, and then kind of, you know, redirect the conversation to be towards positive body talk, you know, or the body love, right? So I love how I feel in this, I love, you know, how my body feels today, different things like that, where you're not talking about specific parts of your body or things like that. But also just moving away from body talk in general to being like, let's appreciate each other for our qualities and characteristics and personalities that have led us to have these relationships in the first place. So I think redirecting people in that way can always be helpful, and you could do that on social media too. Like, you know, I could usually see someone responding to a post saying like, hey, knock off the body shaming. What I really love about you is that you're quirky, or that you have a fantastic sense of humor, or, you know, kind of something like that. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I agree. Just definitely not talking about bodies, like, unnecessary. But if this happened, I can see how it may be a little bit difficult, like, to respond to a comment or something if you want to get into, like, a little social media battle. But, like, if you hear those comments in person, which I think we all do, like, you can always ask, and this works for anything, just like, what did you mean by that? Because then they're forced to explain, oh, I meant that they're skinny and that's better. You know, like, so you're forced to, like, explain your problematic thought, and that even that small thing can make them think about why they said it, and the fact that you're challenging them can make them think about it too.
Good question.
Just to like respond to that, that's something that like I've seen a ton. And my friends and I will like you know how people like asterisk like correct things. So we'll like asterisk and be like hilarious or like beautiful or fun. And like when we have like 7 of those, then like people kind of like get the message.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Can we thank our panelists?
Thank you all for